The first error trap is not turning the microphone on. And the second one is getting the cursed clicker. But Charles, I will make you a promise. I will get people out of here at 12 o'clock. And the stretch goal is to allow some time for questions because you've been sitting here 3 hours and haven't had a chance to ask a question yet. So we'll see if we can do that as well. All right. Yeah, cool. Just before lunch. All right. So I did come a long way to get here. I came by Ohio and Mississippi to tie some work in. I've been here for 8 days and I don't have a suitcase. So I was going to be wearing really cool company clothes, but you've got the Target Dave for today. I walked into a mall in Atlanta on Saturday and sort of walked up to the counter with some bags of clothes. And the lady there said, "Oh, do you need a bag?" And I'm like, "No, I've bought one," and unzipped it and put all the clothes in. And I've now got a second bag. But let's talk, what I want to talk about today is I just want to talk about a bit of background to New View Safety Theory, or HOP, because we've talked about a lot of principles at this conference. And there's a lot of sort of thinking over the last 40 years in behind this. So I just want to kind of like lay out that landscape from at least my interpretation and my perspective on it. And I just want to talk about what we've kind of done to, like what Charles said, how do you make things as simple as it can be, but no simpler? So let's talk about that. Clicker's not doing too bad so far. So I guess this sort of started with High Reliability Organisation in 1985. When I walked onto stage, I was actually meant to walk up here to AC/DC Thunderstruck. Like, they asked me what intro music you want. What happened? Because anyway, so I was going to start by talking about the 70s. We had AC/DC, we had 3 Mile Island, we had Jens Rasmussen laying all of that was cool. What we are talking about here, and also I was born. So it was a kind of 4 kind of important things happened in the 70s. But then in the 80s, we got HRO theory, which was kind of the first time safety researchers had gone, well, let's not look at incidents and reconstruct safety kind of in hindsight. Let's actually go and find some organizations like air traffic control and naval aircraft carriers and nuclear power operations, and what makes them tick. You know, how do you run something that complex reliably? So that was really cool. And then we got along and go, that's fine. We got these HRO principles, but what do we do with that? So resilience engineering came along in early 2000s, led by Dave and Eric, and kind of said, it has to be about a set of actionable tactics. It has to be like an engineering discipline. We have to be able to design and run our organizations that will create these resilient properties. So these guys went off and did a lot of resilience engineering stuff. We're now 20 years ago. And then Eric kind of said, well, high reliability organizations, resilience engineering, we're kind of talking about safety, but we're not using the word safety. Let's kind of just make it really easy for people to go, here's the way we do safety kind of now, largely safety 1, and here's this additional perspective, and I use those words quite deliberately, additional perspective, additional lens to look at your system. They got safety 1 and safety 2 going. It was still very sort of sciencey, you know, Eric's a computer scientist by background. So Sydney Decker comes along and goes, what about the people? What about the culture? Let's make sure we remember that we put people at the center of everything. So look at all this language we're getting. And I guess why is it confusing? Because every couple of years we're getting new kind of ideas. And then we've got Hop and Todd, who's floating around somewhere, probably podcasting, but you know, human performance was around since about 2000, Department of Energy, Department of Defense. But then Todd wrote his 5 Principles book, which you've seen a number of times in this conference, and probably most widely used industry framework around this new view, and I guess the theme of this conference. And then Dave Woods comes out in some really random language that only Dave Woods can understand and starts talking about graceful extensibility. So I spent a month with him at the lab at OSU finishing off my PhD. We wrote something, and then I've sort of been going around talking about, look, there's this big Venn diagram of overlapping ideas. You can have these slides, but there's some consolidated principles that are sort of shining through all of this theory over the last 40 years. But now you might just go, okay, so what? So what? You know, I live in the real world, in a real organization. That all sounds great, but tomorrow, what do I do? And I guess that's where we've let ourselves down. I think there's been 2 really big barriers to organizations moving forward with human performance quickly. One is all we've been doing is talking about concepts and principles, and organizations need things that they can do. And secondly, a lot of these ideas we've positioned in sort of contrast and opposition to everything that organizations are doing today. Organizations don't revolutionize. human systems don't revolutionize, they evolve. And they often evolve much more slowly than senior managers and safety professionals would like them to. So about 2017, a couple of people in this room, I think they're in this room, Beth Lay, is she here? Oh, Beth Lay. Jim Moranis. Clearly, I'm not that interesting. Jim's in the room. Okay. So about 5 years ago, we started talking about kind of like, you know, in the real world, how do we understand where organizations are at? How do we try to find and understand where they're at and what's that next step forward for them? Because you can't go, well, here you are and here's where you should be and why aren't you doing it? So we go, there must be kind of like a progression, and organizations can deal with progression, can't kind of deal with wholesale kind of transformation. The only people that think that transformation works are the large management consultants and boards. The only people who think that organizations, well, who still probably believe that organizations can transform. So what happened, I guess we've been sort of pottering away and how to understand and help organizations. And so then COVID happened, and I live in Melbourne in Australia. I think until the recent sort of China, Shanghai, zero approach to COVID, we were kind of the most lockdown place. They had like 7 lockdowns and 180 or 190 days. So kind of not much work to do, a lot of time on our hands. So kind of went to work and went, what does this look like? And I kind of want to show you quickly, and then I want to show you, we've had the chance to do this with quite a few organisations. I want to show you what we've learned. Now, what we've learned might not be that surprising to you, but we kind of now got a little bit of data in behind it, which can make sense. So we kind of built a model, as you kind of do. So David Boris wrote a paper in 2009. He's an Australian academic, now living in Wisconsin. And he wrote this paper about the 5th age of safety, the adaptive age, 2009. And he sort of said that there's this big progression that organisations can choose to go through in the way they approach safety, from rules to culture to resilience, as these big kind of waves. So we sort of thought, well, that's not a bad framework to think about the way that organisations might approach this. I mean, you can have an organisation that's going, I want to take a compliance. You know, I'm a legal compliance kind of, this is my approach, and this is what safety looks like in my organisation with that sort of an approach or strategy. I want to take a culture kind of zero harm, kind of safety is the first priority, let's win the hearts and minds of people. Cultural approach can kind of take the things that we're talking about here, which is about safety as an emergent property of the work, and the way that I design and execute that work and support that work is going to generate the safety outcomes. So we sort of built this model. We went back and forward in literature in 2020, and so it looks like this is going to be a really busy slide. You're warned. So we kind of built this out, and you can download this on the internet. There's 40 pages. It's just a blueprint, and and the questions you can kind of reflect on your organisation and go, so how does my organisation approach safety? It's really easy to get hold of, so I can send these around. But we sort of said, okay, there's these different kind of factors about how you set the direction for work in an organisation, how you enable and support that with the capabilities to meet that direction, how you execute day in, day out. So we've had the chance, I guess, in this year to work with about 20 different companies, about 50,000 workers. And what I wanted to do for this conference is kind of go, because I haven't done this talk before, what I wanted to do was go, what are we learning? What are we kind of seeing that's reinforcing or surprising us? Because I think what we're seeing is going to help you with kind of like, what would be the sequence of activities or that I would take my organisation on if I wanted to progress down this pathway? Because when we started, we just had this kind of like this dump of things to do, but there's got to be an order to the way that you move in the organisation. So I want to talk about some things that we have learned. Hopefully you find these interesting. I'm going to have to refer to the slide a bit myself because, so this idea, I don't know how that looks. Okay, so I'll talk about this idea of senior leadership. So I know that Todd would talk about his 3 levers for change and got to change the mindset of leaders, of senior leaders. We talk about management response matters in one of the 5 principles. We see it play out in data from real people in the organisation. You see on the left there an infrastructure organisation with senior leadership with a very compliant perception about compliance. So you ask the question of, what do leaders focus their attention on? Making sure workers follow the rules, or making sure workers have everything they need to do their work? You know, kind of that's the spectrum. The leaders at the compliance end, you'll see all of the execution factors in the organisation become very compliant. Communication is very one-way. Decision-making is very hierarchical. The frontline workers are seen as units of labour and instruments of compliance. The learning and development is just basic competency training, minimum competency training. and we're safe if we don't have any incidents. So the first kind of movement to actually move an organisation at the point of risk has to happen at senior leadership. That shadow that Larry Sen would say, that shadow throughout the organisation is real. So I thought for a while that senior leaders really didn't matter that much, particularly in large organisation. It was more about the operational units and middle management, but I was wrong. Well, the data sort of says I was wrong. It's got to go, senior leadership does matter. So when you're starting on this hop thing, need to think in your strategy about how am I moving my senior leaders, because then we see it move into the middle, and when you get those senior leaders that are saying, well, it's actually about making sure people follow the rules, but I also need to make sure that people have what they need to do their work, you start to see a lot of movement, but you still see that front line getting a bit stuck. Because no matter what the senior leaders are saying and doing, if it's not sort of passing through that frontline leadership, the workers are still kind of experiencing a very transactional approach to their work. Because as their supervisors, we've talked about things like pre-job briefings and design of work and things like that. It's really that local management that engages and facilitates that process. And then we start to see this movement, and you can actually move this first. On the right-hand side, we found one company that they're sort of saying, yes, leadership are all about making sure people have what they need. Let's just call it that, which is obviously the resources to do work as done. And then we start to see the frontline experience of work filling out. No two organisations are the same, but I'd say in this thing that senior leadership matters. You have to get senior leadership to see safety and work not as about compliance, but about obviously understanding work as done and making sure people have what they need to do their job. So that's kind of really important. Now I'm only going to have 4 or 5 of these lessons, and then some fun ones at the end as well, because it's got to be fun. So what do we see move also quite quickly? So those 2 things down the bottom are about the resources and goal conflict and trade-offs. So we start to see goal conflict and trade-off is this idea that people would say, I can always put safety in front of other operational goals, which is kind of the whole big safety first kind of thing. So we see it. So if you've still got a very compliant leadership sending those messages, put safety first, you'll get part of the way there with your workforce, and they'll feel like, okay, yes, we've got the resources for safety and that. But then you get very, very stuck until your senior leadership actually start moving and sending some more, I guess, acting in ways that are consistent with all of that messaging and really reaching out to the people. And then we see that goal conflict one move. We see this in a lot of things, which is that when you get people going, yep, 10 out of 10, absolutely, I and everyone else in this organisation can put safety first and genuinely kind of believe that. But then what you see on that interesting kind of picture on the right is the resource allocation doesn't quite move with the goal conflict, because resource allocation, we kind of ask people is, I have the minimum resources kind of to comply, or I have all of the resources I need for both foreseen and unforeseen situations. So this is this idea of operational slack. Do I have reserve deployable resources in my organisation to cater for emergence and unforeseen situations? And so that's about work. That's no longer about safety. That's about getting work done effectively. And that really takes kind of movement up the top of the map there. And there's a couple of things that are there. This is a senior leadership that is really driven by making sure that they understand the work that people do and people have everything that they need. And also that monitoring and metrics one on the left actually says, we know we're safe when, on one hand, we have low numbers of incidents, or on the other hand, we understand what it takes for work to be successful and we support that. So we don't consider our work safe unless we know what it takes for every task in the organisation to be successful and know that it's supported. So if you've got that senior leadership and that organisational mindset around, we know we need to understand what successful work looks like and what it takes, and we're committed to making sure our people have everything we need, we start to see our people going, yep, safety comes first, we can get everything that we need. So that's kind of cool. So once you get that senior leadership conversation, the next step in the journey is all about the work that people do and how you can align the organisation around it and deliver support to it at the point of work. So you'll see these are all random because obviously people have organisations very different, but I was kind of highlighting a few. Oh, wow, there's the double click. Oh, there's a double click back. Okay, frontline supervision. So it's a real sort of passion of mine, frontline supervision. I kind of like the idea of it's that person who, guy or girl, is standing up at 6 o'clock in the morning and establishing the day for the group. And I think that's one of the most important inflection points for work in an organization, is that frontline leader. And we see here, you see a field services business that's kind of doing okay, but you see that thing there with the operational management. This is that supervisor's role is to make sure that they undertake their safety work activities, that they've made sure that there's a JSA or a procedure, they've made sure that the person's got the training they've made sure that they've done their visible leadership visit, their task observation, and then they can get on and do the supervisory work. On the other side is that actually supervisors deliver safety through the way they engage and manage their team, not as a safety specific activity. So if you leave your supervisors behind, you're also going to be leaving your frontline workers behind. And you see that really plays out in decision making, because if your leaders aren't seeing their role in the front line as a collaboration, then workers aren't seeing themselves as a co-designer of work, and the organisation doesn't feel like it defers to expertise. In that case, the organisation, that decision making will go is, does the person with the most knowledge have the most say in an operational decision? Or does the most senior person in the room have the most say? And that's what we know about hierarchy and power and deference to expertise and real challenges with being resilient and adaptive in organisations. So if you leave your frontline leaders behind, you're going to leave your frontline workforce behind, and you're not going to get the sort of adaptive, resilient decision making you need in terms of what we're seeing. And then once you start to bring that, once you start to bring your leaders along, you bring your workforce along. You see on the right-hand side. But decision-making seems to be the hardest thing to move in an organisation. That principle in HRO of deference to expertise, we just see that because you can't, well, that's where, I guess we'll see what happens. You can't bullshit the decision-making thing. Like, you're either a hierarchical organisation where, like, this person can deal with low risks, this person can deal with medium risks, this person can deal with high risks. The more senior you are, the more ability you have to, understand work and predict the future, which is also BS. But this idea is really hard to move, So that's something that I think, and it's really hard to put a program around. It's actually got to be a leadership mindset that goes to diversity and psychological safety and all of those things. But we actually see those two on the left-hand side, communication and decision-making. So the resilient end of communication is this idea of genuine open communication in the organisation. So we go from one-way, top-down broadcast style comms to two-way consultative kind of communication to open communication. Any person can say anything to anyone in the organisation at any time, and feel psychologically safe to do that. So we see the organisational responses to the communication and the decision-making. Because ultimately, psychological safety is, why do people speak up in groups? Because they want a certain decision or a certain course of action to be taken. They feel that they can openly speak up, and they feel respected and listened to for the information and the insights and the knowledge and the experience that they have, then that's psychological safety. So we see that as a really cool proxy for helping talk to organisations about their level of psychological safety. Okay, so I'm going to do some alignment things, because alignment gets really fascinating when you look at these larger scale things coming from different parts of business. So here's a mining company, 21 senior leaders, top 2 levels of management, 265 frontline field workers specifically, and you see they've basically got the same view of the organisation. We use this as a proxy for alignment around work, the gap between work as imagined, work as done. If senior leaders have a perception of these types of things in their organisation and kind of can look at themselves and their organisation in the mirror, and their organisation at the very front line. So here we're talking about people in an executive office in a major city and people operating a drill 500 metres underground in a mine 1,500 miles away. If they have a same picture of their organisation, then it's a pretty good proxy for the openness of communication and the trust and the understanding of the work. If you do get something like this, start go, oh, okay, because senior leadership usually have a pretty rose-coloured view of their organisation. It's kind of like, well, it's a great place to work. So you see here, you see that leaders think there's really good two-way communication. They think their systems, support work. And then the frontline office workers who sort of sit in the same environment as the executives go, yeah, it's not so bad. The system's designed to support kind of what we do in the office. And then you get the poor guys and girls who are out there trying to operate trains on a complex networks, and they go, mostly this is a bag of SHIT. So mostly. But kind of interestingly, the one that they do, so then the one they do is the contractor management, because they kind of go, we're in the field and we're partnering with these people, and that's how the railway gets run. But then, the office and the senior management think that the work, that sort of aspect of the organisation is really compliance orientated and managed by contract, because that's what they say. But this gets really this is kind of a broken organisation, where you've got that difference in perception of what it takes. Because how can senior leaders support the people in the front line if they don't understand the experience of work for the people in the front line? A couple of other things that are kind of cool. So many of you, I don't know, who works in an international company, like with operations outside the US as well, or Canada? Is that a third or a half? Congratulations, Ron, on your new job. All right, so here's a company. I'm going to show 2 slides. And this idea of standardization, this is about, I've got 100 operations all around the world, and I want everyone to do this pink form to report an incident or to do a permit or something like that. So we push this standardization. See, here's the English-speaking parts of this organisation, who all think the management system isn't too bad at supporting work as done. Then same organisation, let's go to the countries that don't speak English. And they all go, well, this management system doesn't help me. It's not sensitive to my culture. It's not sensitive to my language. And then you look at risk management as well. And that risk management question is about, do we do risk assessments to comply with our legal requirements? Or do we do risk assessments to understand the things that we don't know and generate foresight about future operating conditions? And they go, well, we've got these tools from the English-speaking head office, and we'll do them because we have to, but unhelpful. So this is kind of really stark when you look at standardization versus localization and multinational organizations, and how you actually think about running a multinational business becomes fascinating. And then what happens when you put 2 different cultures together? So this is an organization in the United States with both Hispanic, Spanish-speaking workers as well as English-speaking workers. The same organizations, people working side by side in the same work team, with the same manager, with the same systems, with the same resources, with the same roster, and they see things very, very differently. They're not being enabled in a language or in a cultural way that they understand. They're not being led or enabled in that way. But interestingly, they've got this real native resilience around decision-making that maybe the Anglo parts of the organisation don't have. But what's fascinating is when you put these different cultures side by side in the same team, and their experience of work is perceived as very differently. And then you've got to ask yourself questions, well, are we really enabling the subcultures in our organisation in the way that we do work? Do we embrace that? Because that was kind of fascinating. I think I've got one more kind of interesting thing. Different teams. This is a mining site. This is just a mine site, like only a couple of 100 people. And this is 2 different teams. This is the operations team and the capital projects team, and their experience of senior leadership and the way the organisation sets direction. And this is what happens when a new shiny thing comes along, like there's a new project, and senior leadership go, oh, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this project. And the guys and girls who are producing the 100,000 tonnes a day in the operations sort of get forgotten and sidelined, and they can just take care of themselves. So you're sort of seeing like these people in the projects organisation going, yeah, communication's good. Workers are involved in designing what's going on. Our senior leaders are kind of leading us. We've got risk management happening. We've got the safety organisation providing us with support, and they've got operations over here, running that major hazard risk every day, going, oh, be nice if we had that too. So this is the same. This is like a 400-person site. And this is where kind of like how this works. And this is this idea of Edgar Schein that said, organizations don't have, a culture. And then you get people come along and go, well, should we even talk about culture? But if we park all that aside, we go that every team has its own norms and experiences and ways of working. So you kind of uncover that. I might just park it there. That was kind of all I had. I had a few lessons you can take away. We sort of run a score off the back of these. So if you want to replace your recordable injury rates and put an employee engagement type of score, you can do that. Like I said, you can download everything I've spoken about today. Well, you're the first people to see the fancy graphs and the themes, but the blueprint is 40 pages. It's freely downloadable. You can have it. So we do have 7 or 8 minutes, and I'm going to take them because I only got 30 instead of 50. But I'm going to take them and give them to you to ask questions. So let's see. Best questions gets $100 off the next conference. That's autonomy. That's autonomy.
I thought there may have been a conspiracy the whole time between the speakers running over.
It's lunch, man.
That was really cool. You can't read the data, but you can see the difference, the visualization. And is that one of the takes, I guess? Is that how you like, man, they don't look the same? That tells me I need to dig deeper.
Yeah, normally when we look at that, I mean, we just run a simple questionnaire. It takes 5 minutes off a QR code, and we sort of partnered with Griffith. It took us like 5 versions and 18 months through COVID to get it where we're happy with it. But yeah, we just have different levels of the organisation, different divisions, and we can kind of cut it around. And it's like, I mean, you've all done employee engagement kind of surveys. It's kind of like just a resilience survey in the same. And I think the principle is I kind of didn't want to do a survey because surveys are mostly rubbish. But this is the language of organisations. You know, you can't fight organisational institutional logics. Kind of got to work with senior managers. Go, oh, okay, you're used to doing survey. We can do a survey. Used to a diagnostic. Yep, do a diagnostic. Okay, used to a score like an employee engagement score. Okay, we can give you a capacity score. You can set 2 or 3 percentage targets each year, and kind of like using the language, kind of like that. How do you get an organisation to take that first step?
So just a quick follow-up then. On the responses, do you see a different response rate from different levels in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yes.
That's great. Really cool stuff.
Yeah, you do. Oh, that's good.
Do you get any context with the responses so that when you have a target area, you can understand why it may be the way it is?
Yeah, good point. Data never, so no data in your organization gives you answers. Data should give you the questions to ask, the lines of inquiry to pursue. So you should always roll off the back of this with a deeper discovery process and focus groups and go, why is this perceived the way that it is? Otherwise you'll just, I don't even know what you guys be throwing darts at the wall and blindfolded, hoping you hit something. There was one down here, Charles.
Where? Oh, here.
Right there.
Thanks. Just curious about your methodology. We're always talking about survey fatigue in our organization, and like, do you strive to send this out to everybody, or do you advocate like a targeted approach where you can sort of dial down the opportunity for survey fatigue?
Yeah, look, it depends what organizations want to do. Like the problem that we were having before we were doing the surveys is we had the framework, we're doing it by interviews and focus groups. So we did an organization, we did like 160 interviews over 4 weeks. It's expensive and you're still only getting this really small sample. And so you kind of gotta do something that hits people, not as the only thing, but as a good sort of way of going, the first filter of going, what should we be thinking about in this organization? You get the fatigue, which is why we tried to make it 5 minutes and kind of just do this. We do the little sort of thumbs up, thumbs down at the end of the survey. Was the survey a good experience? We get kind of like 80+% across the board. People saying, yeah, that was okay. Sit down and you give someone, go, here's 100 questions to do. It's going to take you 30 minutes. It's like, geez, but we did it in a way that, a supervisor can have a QR code, get the guys at a pre-start job briefing and go, hey, guys, next 5 minutes, guys, girls, next 5 minutes. Just scan this on your smartphone. We're just going to complete this survey. So got to kind of think about the UX of whatever you're doing. Yeah, it's a good question.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Last one.
Last one. We're going to go early for lunch. I'm going to have a long answer. I'm going to take every last second, Charles. Every last.
Okay, on that last slide that you had with this capacity score, has any organisation been brave enough to replace the day since clocks with something like this?
We're seeing we got 2 organisations committed to surveying, and they're finalising their targets. The Australian financial year starts 1 July, and so we've got 2 organisations that are kind of in that target setting kind of phase now, like they do with employee engagement, and their management bonuses will be around moving this by a couple of points. So we're getting a little bit of traction because there has to be an alternative, right? Like, it has to be a reasonable. And if you look at some of the, I don't know what your financial regulatory rules are over here, but the financial regulatory rules in my part of the world says that, these things you can't put bonuses against things that aren't quantifiable, that don't have a level of reliability. So that's why, your HR bonuses are tied to employee engagement scores and things like that. So it has to be an alternative. So we got, yeah, so we're there. We got organizations who are going to go, yep. No bonuses next year for recordable injury rates. All safety bonus is going to go on moving the needle on this, 3 to 5 points.
Really, you had to be way over there. Tanya Hewitt, come on,
Charles. I got you back on time, didn't I? Should be more
Yeah,
grateful.
and
Should
look,
be more
look, look.
grateful than that.
After this question, I'm going to say, if you'd rather eat than learn, get up and leave, just do it quietly.
Yeah.
That's fine. The man came from Australia.
Don't even
I'm
have to do
gonna
it
give him an
quietly.
opportunity.
Still waiting for my thunderstruck.
So David, thanks for the great presentation, but you had just said that you had done interviews and focus groups before with organizations. I'm just wondering, have you done a mixed method type approach to be able to use some of this quantified data, which we know people answer differently than, quantified data than qualificate, what am I trying to say?
I got it. I know the
Qualitative
question.
data.
I've got your question.
Qualitative data.
So
Because you're going to
yeah.
get different information. So I'm just wondering if you've done anything mixed method with the same organization.
yeah, so yes, absolutely. And so a couple of important things is we had the focus groups and interviews because that's easy. Once we'd done the blueprint, we could just kind of do it and make it easy. Once we started with the survey, we did a couple of projects which were Chinese walled. So we had a consultant running the survey and not speaking to a consultant who was doing interviews and focus groups. And then we were comparing the data coming back. And that's why it took us 5 goes for us to be confident that the information we were getting from the survey was matching the information we were getting out of the interviews and the focus groups. And then we went, the first couple of times it was just like, not right. The survey wasn't right. Based on what we were getting. So we did a couple of projects like that until we got happy. And then we had Griffith University look through that stuff. And then we sort of settled on where we've got now. So now we sort of just do it in sequence. We tell organizations, do the first filter with the survey, and then we'll use some targeted kind of focus groups. Most organizations don't just want to do a survey and leave it at that. But yeah, see how we go. Lunchtime.